The desert was silent. For more than 3,000 years, the Valley of the Kings slept beneath the Egyptian sun. Winds drifted across the limestone cliffs. Seasons passed. Empires rose and fell. Entire civilizations appeared, flourished, and disappeared into history. Beneath the sand, hidden from the world, lay a small tomb. It belonged to a king who had ruled only briefly, a ruler who died before reaching adulthood, a pharaoh whose reign was so unremarkable that later generations of Egyptians barely remembered his name. Yet today he is the most famous pharaoh who ever lived. His golden face appears in textbooks, museums, documentaries, and films. Millions recognize his burial mask instantly. His story has become synonymous with ancient Egypt itself. But why? Why did Tutankhamun become legendary, while greater rulers faded into obscurity? Why does the world remember a boy king whose reign lasted less than a decade? The answer begins not with his life, but with a discovery made thousands of years after his death. In November of 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter stood before a sealed doorway hidden beneath the sands of the Valley of the Kings. Years of searching had brought him to this moment. When a small opening was made in the doorway, Carter carefully inserted a candle and peered inside. Treasures glittered in the darkness. Gold reflected the tiny flame. Statues emerged from the shadows. Furniture, chariots, jewelry, and mysterious objects filled the chamber. When asked if he could see anything, Carter famously replied, "Yes, wonderful things." At that moment, the forgotten boy king became immortal. But to understand why his tomb changed history, we must first travel back to the world he inherited, a world in crisis, a kingdom struggling to find its identity, a throne waiting for a child. Chapter 1. Egypt before the boy king, 515. Decades before Tutankhamun's birth, Egypt stood at the height of its power. The new kingdom was one of the wealthiest and most influential states in the ancient world. Its armies marched across foreign lands. Its temples dominated the landscape. Its pharaohs were viewed as living gods. Yet beneath this strength, a revolution was beginning. A revolution unlike anything Egypt had experienced before. At its center stood a ruler known today as Akhenaten. Before changing his name, he had been called Amenhotep IV. His early reign appeared normal. Then everything changed. Akhenaten challenged traditions that had existed for centuries. He elevated a solar deity known as Aten above all others. The old gods that Egyptians had worshipped for generations suddenly lost favor. Powerful temples were abandoned. Priests saw their influence decline. Ancient religious practices were disrupted. The pharaoh even moved Egypt's capital to an entirely new city. Today, we call it Amarna. There, Akhenaten attempted to build a different vision of Egypt. Art styles changed. Religious ceremonies changed. Even the way the royal family was depicted became radically different. To some, it was a spiritual transformation. To others, it was a dangerous break from tradition. The consequences rippled throughout Egyptian society. Many people remained attached to the old gods. Temples that once stood at the center of community life lost support. Political tensions increased. Questions emerged about stability. When Akhenaten died, Egypt faced uncertainty. The kingdom needed restoration. The old order had been weakened. The future was unclear. And onto this troubled stage stepped a child. A boy who would become king before he was old enough to fully understand the weight of the crown. His name was Tutankhamun. Soon history would know him as Tutankhamun. Chapter 2. A Child on the Throne. The throne of Egypt was never meant to feel small. It was a seat of divine authority, a symbol of order, power, and cosmic balance. From this throne, mighty pharaohs had commanded armies, raised temples, and shaped the destiny of one of the world's greatest civilizations. Yet sometime around 1332 BCE, that throne belonged to a child. The boy who would become Tutankhamun was born into one of the most unusual periods in Egyptian history. Even today, many details of his early life remain uncertain. Ancient records are incomplete. Names have been erased. Monuments have been damaged by time. Historians continue to debate exactly who his parents were, although evidence strongly suggests he was closely connected to the royal family of Akhenaten. From the moment he entered the world, he lived at the center of a kingdom undergoing dramatic change. His childhood was likely spent in the city of Amarna. Unlike the ancient capitals that had come before it, Amarna was a new city created by Akhenaten to honor the Aten. Broad avenues stretched across the desert landscape. Temples stood open beneath the sun. Palaces gleamed with painted walls and colorful decorations. It was a city unlike any Egypt had seen before. Here, the young prince grew up, surrounded by the symbols of a religious revolution. The old gods that Egyptians had worshipped for centuries had been pushed aside. The Aten dominated public life. Everything around him reflected the vision of his predecessor. For a child, this world may have seemed normal. After all, it was the only world he knew. But beyond the palace walls, many Egyptians still remembered the old ways, the great temples of Amun, the ancient ceremonies, the traditions that had guided the kingdom for generations. The conflict between old and new continued long after Akhenaten's reforms began. When the young prince was still a child, events moved quickly. The royal family faced uncertainty. Power shifted among influential figures at court, and then, astonishingly, the boy found himself next in line for the throne. No one knows exactly what he felt. History rarely records the private emotions of children. Perhaps he was excited, perhaps frightened, perhaps too young to fully understand what was happening. What we do know is that he became pharaoh at approximately 8 or 9 years of age, an age when most children are still learning about the world around them, an age when they depend heavily on adults for guidance. Yet in theory, this child was now ruler of Egypt. His official name at the time was Tutankhamun. The name carried powerful meaning. It connected him directly to the worship of Aten, the solar deity promoted by Akhenaten. Every royal title reinforced the religious transformation that had reshaped the kingdom, but the political winds were already changing. The leaders surrounding the young king recognized that Egypt needed stability. Years of religious upheaval had created division. The old temples sought restoration. Priests desired renewed influence. Many officials wanted a return to familiar traditions. The young pharaoh stood at the center of these competing interests. He was king, but he was not ruling alone. Experienced advisors guided the government. Senior officials managed state affairs. Powerful figures helped shape decisions that affected the entire kingdom. To the public, Tutankhamun represented continuity. He was the living embodiment of royal authority. Yet behind the scenes, older and more experienced hands likely directed much of the kingdom's day-to-day administration. This was not unusual. Child rulers throughout history have often relied upon councils, regents, and advisors. Egypt was no exception. Still, symbols matter, and the young king soon became the symbol of a new direction. One of the most significant changes of his reign occurred through something seemingly simple: a name. At some point during his early rule, Tutankhamun became Tutankhamun. The difference appears small, but in ancient Egypt, names carried enormous significance. Tutankhamun meant living image of Aten. Tutankhamun meant living image of Amun. With that change, the kingdom signaled a return to the traditional religious order. Amun had once been among Egypt's most important gods. His temples had dominated the religious landscape. His priests had held tremendous influence. Now, under the reign of the young king, Amun was returning to prominence. The change represented far more than theology. It was a political statement, a declaration that Egypt was moving away from the experiment of Amarna, a signal that the old institutions were regaining their place. The young pharaoh's wife also reflected these transformations. He married Ankhesenamun, a royal princess closely connected to the ruling family. Like her husband, she changed her name as Egypt shifted back toward traditional religion. Together, the young royal couple became symbols of restoration. Ancient artworks portray them in moments of remarkable intimacy. Unlike the rigid images common in earlier periods, some scenes show tenderness between king and queen. They appear together beneath the life-giving rays of the sun, sharing quiet moments, participating in ceremonies, presenting an image of royal unity. These scenes provide rare glimpses into the human side of ancient royalty. Though thousands of years separate us from them, it is difficult not to wonder about their lives. What conversations did they share? How did they view the responsibilities placed upon them? Did they understand that future generations would become fascinated by their story? Of course, neither could have imagined the answer. At the time, they were simply living within the realities of their age, an age filled with uncertainty. The young king's reign was not defined by military conquest. He did not carve out vast new territories. He did not leave behind gigantic monuments that reshaped the Egyptian landscape. Instead, his importance lay elsewhere. He became the face of recovery, a symbol that reassured the kingdom during a period of transition. For ordinary Egyptians, stability mattered more than glory. Farmers needed predictable seasons. Merchants needed secure trade routes. Priests needed functioning temples. Communities needed order. The young king helped represent the return of that order. Whether the decisions were truly his or largely directed by advisors is a question historians continue to discuss. But symbols possess power of their own, and in a kingdom searching for balance, the image of a youthful pharaoh embracing traditional values carried immense significance. The child who had inherited a troubled kingdom was gradually becoming a king associated with renewal. Yet while his image stood before the people, others worked quietly behind the scenes. Men whose influence may have exceeded even that of the pharaoh himself. Powerful officials, experienced generals, ambitious advisors. Their names would become deeply intertwined with the story of Tutankhamun, and among them were two figures who would shape the future of Egypt long after the boy king was gone. Their names were Ai and Horemheb, and their story begins in the shadows behind the throne. Chapter 3. The Men Behind the Throne. The image presented to the people of Egypt was clear. A young pharaoh sat upon the throne. The gods had chosen their ruler. Order had been restored. The kingdom was once again moving towards stability. But behind every throne in history, there are individuals whose influence extends far beyond what the public sees. Ancient Egypt was no different. While Tutankhamun wore the crown, powerful figures worked in the background. They advised him, protected him, guided the administration of the kingdom, and perhaps, in many matters, made decisions on his behalf. The boy king may have been the face of Egypt, but others helped steer its course. Among these figures, two names stand out above all others: Ai and Horemheb. Together, they represented two different sources of power. One came from the royal court and religious establishment. The other emerged from the military. Both would play major roles in shaping Egypt's future, and both would outlive Tutankhamun. To understand their importance, imagine the challenges facing Egypt during the young king's reign. The country was recovering from years of upheaval. Religious institutions needed rebuilding. Relationships with foreign powers required attention. Government offices had to function smoothly. The kingdom could not simply pause because a child occupied the throne. Experienced leadership was essential. This is where I entered the story. A was an older and highly respected official. Even before Tutankhamun's reign, he had occupied important positions within the royal court. He had survived the turbulent years of Akhenaten's rule. He understood palace politics. He knew how government worked, and he possessed something especially valuable in uncertain times: experience. Ancient records suggest that I held considerable influence. Some historians believe he may have served as a mentor or advisor to the young king. Others see him as one of the central figures guiding Egypt's return to traditional religious practices. Whatever his exact role, his presence was unmistakable. Again and again, his name appears in connection with important events of the period. In a kingdom led by a child, wisdom and experience carried tremendous weight. I had both. Yet I was not the only powerful figure standing beside the throne. There was also Horemheb. Where I represented courtly authority, Horemheb represented military strength. He was a distinguished commander, a man responsible for overseeing Egypt's armed forces. At a time when foreign rivals watched Egypt carefully, military leadership remained crucial. The empire, established by earlier pharaohs, still required protection. Trade routes needed security. Border regions demanded attention. The army remained one of the most powerful institutions in the kingdom, and Horemheb stood at its center. Ancient depictions often show him as confident and capable. He was respected by soldiers, trusted by officials, and deeply involved in maintaining stability. Though he was not born a king, he possessed qualities that would eventually make him one of Egypt's most important rulers. But that future still lay ahead. For now, he served the kingdom under Tutankhamun's authority. Together, I and Horemheb formed pillars supporting the throne. One guided affairs of state. The other safeguarded Egypt's strength. The young king stood between them. From a modern perspective, it is tempting to imagine dramatic struggles for power, secret plots, hidden rivalries, political intrigue unfolding behind palace walls. The truth is harder to know. Ancient evidence rarely provides clear answers. What survives are fragments, statues, inscriptions, damaged monuments, pieces of a story scattered across thousands of years. What historians can say with confidence is that both men became increasingly important during and after Tutankhamun's reign. Their prominence suggests they held significant authority even while the young pharaoh lived. This raises an intriguing question. How much power did Tutankhamun personally exercise? It is impossible to know precisely. As pharaoh, he remained the ultimate symbol of authority. Officially, all major decisions flowed from him. Royal decrees carried his name. Ceremonies centered upon his position. The legitimacy of the state rested upon his status as king. Yet governing a vast kingdom required practical expertise. No child could manage every aspect of administration alone. Therefore, advisors inevitably played critical roles. This does not diminish Tutankhamun's importance. In fact, it highlights something fundamental about monarchy. A king's power often depends upon the people around him. Even the greatest rulers rely upon trusted supporters. For a child king, that dependence becomes even greater. The court surrounding Tutankhamun functioned like a network. Priests worked to restore traditional worship. Officials managed taxation and construction projects. Scribes recorded decisions. Military commanders protected Egypt's interests abroad. Messengers carried information across the kingdom. Every part of government required coordination, and standing above it all was the image of the young pharaoh. To ordinary Egyptians, these complexities were largely invisible. What they saw was a king, a living representative of divine order. a symbol that stability had returned after years of uncertainty. The details of political administration mattered far less than the appearance of continuity. That appearance was powerful. It reassured the population, it strengthened confidence, and it helped Egypt move forward. Yet, beneath the surface, the ambitions of powerful men continued to shape events. Ai and Horemheb were not merely servants of the state. They were influential individuals with their own goals, responsibilities, and visions for Egypt's future. Both understood that the kingdom stood at a crossroads. The choices made during Tutankhamun's reign would determine whether Egypt fully emerged from the shadow of the Amarna period. The restoration of traditional religion had begun, but restoring temples was only part of the challenge. The old gods needed to reclaim their place in Egyptian society. Priests needed support. Sacred sites required rebuilding. The relationship between the people and their ancient beliefs needed renewal. This effort would become one of the defining features of Tutankhamun's reign. And although the young king's advisors undoubtedly played major roles, it was his name that became associated with the return of Egypt's spiritual foundations. The boy who had inherited a divided kingdom was about to become a symbol of reconciliation, a ruler linked forever with the restoration of the old gods. And in ancient Egypt, few responsibilities were more important than maintaining harmony between humanity and the divine. In the next chapter, we explore how Tutankhamun became the pharaoh who helped bring the old gods back to Egypt, and why that decision helped heal a kingdom still recovering from one of the greatest religious upheavals in its history. Chapter 4. Restoring the Old Gods. For centuries, the people of Egypt had lived in a world filled with gods. The mighty Amun of Thebes, Osiris, Lord of the afterlife, Isis, protector and healer, Horus, the falcon-headed guardian of kingship. Their temples stood across the land. Their festivals brought communities together. Their priests performed rituals believed to maintain harmony between the human world and the divine. To ancient Egyptians, religion was not separate from daily life. It was woven into everything. The rising of the Nile, the planting of crops, the crowning of kings, the journey into the afterlife. The gods were everywhere. Then came the reign of Akhenaten. His religious revolution transformed Egypt in ways few could have imagined. The Aten became the focus of royal worship. Traditional temples lost their influence. Priests who had once held enormous authority found themselves pushed aside. Ancient practices that had endured for generations were suddenly disrupted. For some Egyptians, the changes may have been accepted. For others, they may have felt deeply unsettling. When Tutankhamun became king, Egypt was still living with the consequences of that transformation. The kingdom needed more than political stability. It needed spiritual stability as well. The people needed reassurance. The temples needed restoration. The old relationship between Egypt and its gods needed rebuilding. This became one of the defining features of Tutankhamun's reign. Though still very young, the king's government began reversing many of the religious policies associated with Akhenaten. The most visible symbol of this change was the king's own name. Tutankhaten, living image of Aten, became Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. It was more than a change of words. It was a declaration, a signal that Egypt was turning back toward its traditional beliefs. Across the kingdom, temples dedicated to the old gods began receiving renewed attention. Priests returned to positions of influence. Sacred ceremonies resumed. Religious centers that had once been neglected started to recover. To modern observers, these changes might seem purely spiritual, but in ancient Egypt, religion and politics were inseparable. Temples were not only places of worship, they were economic centers, employers, storehouses, institutions that connected entire communities. When temples prospered, local economies often prospered as well. When religious institutions weakened, their communities could suffer. Restoring the temples, therefore, helped stabilize the kingdom. It strengthened social structures. It rebuilt trust. And it reminded Egyptians of traditions that had guided their civilization for centuries. One important document from Tutankhamun's reign speaks directly to this effort. Known today as the Restoration Stela, it describes a kingdom that had fallen into disorder and neglect. Temples had deteriorated. Shrines had been abandoned. The favor of the gods appeared distant. According to the inscription, the king acted to repair what had been damaged. Whether these words reflected reality exactly or served as royal propaganda, their message was unmistakable. Tutankhamun wished to be seen as a restorer, a healer of divisions, a ruler bringing balance back to Egypt. The idea of balance was deeply important in Egyptian thought. The Egyptians called it Ma'at. It represented harmony, order, justice, and the proper functioning of the universe. Pharaohs were expected to uphold Ma'at. Without it, chaos could spread. Floods might fail. Enemies might threaten the kingdom. The favor of the gods might disappear. For Egyptians, restoring religious traditions was not simply about honoring the past. It was about preserving cosmic order itself. The young king became closely associated with that mission. Although advisors such as A and other officials almost certainly guided many decisions, the public face of restoration remained Tutankhamun. His image appeared on monuments. His name appeared on inscriptions. His reign became linked to renewal. Imagine an Egyptian citizen living during those years, perhaps a farmer near the Nile, perhaps a craftsman in a growing town, perhaps a priest returning to a restored temple. The return of familiar rituals would have felt reassuring. The old festivals could once again be celebrated. The ancient prayers could once again be spoken openly. The traditions, passed down through generations, could continue. For many people, that continuity mattered. Civilizations depend upon shared beliefs and customs. They create identity. They provide stability. They connect individuals to something larger than themselves. After years of uncertainty, Egypt was rediscovering those connections, and at the center stood a teenage king. Ironically, Tutankhamun's fame today comes largely from his tomb. Yet during his lifetime, this restoration may have been his most important achievement. Not conquest, not monument building, not military glory, but healing, helping a divided kingdom move toward unity, helping old institutions regain their footing, helping Egyptians feel that the gods once again favored their land. Of course, not every problem disappeared overnight. Religious restoration was a process. Political tensions still existed. The legacy of Akhenaten's revolution could not simply be erased. Even decades later, future rulers would continue trying to distance themselves from that controversial chapter of Egyptian history. Yet the foundations of recovery were being laid. The kingdom was becoming more stable. Traditional worship was returning. The old gods once again occupied places of honor. And for a time, it seemed Egypt was finding its balance. But while temples were being restored and ceremonies revived, another story was unfolding behind palace walls. The story of a young king growing older, a ruler expected to embody divine authority while still navigating the challenges of youth. What was daily life actually like for Tutankhamun? What did he see when he awoke each morning? Who taught him? Who protected him? Who accompanied him through the halls of power? To answer those questions, we must leave the temples and enter the royal palace itself. For behind the golden throne lived not only a pharaoh, but a teenager whose life was far more human than the legends that would follow him. Chapter 5. Life at Court. When most people imagine a pharaoh, They picture gold, golden masks, golden thrones, golden temples shining beneath the Egyptian sun. But for Tutankhamun, life was not lived inside a museum display. It was lived day by day, morning by morning, hour by hour. Behind the grand ceremonies and royal titles was a young man growing up within one of the most powerful courts in the ancient world. The palace was a place of beauty and authority. Painted walls displayed scenes of nature and royal triumph. Columns rose toward decorated ceilings. Servants moved quietly through corridors carrying food, water, clothing, and messages. Officials waited for audiences. Priests prepared for ceremonies. Scribes recorded events that affected the kingdom. Every corner of the palace reflected order and hierarchy. Nothing happened by accident. Everything followed tradition. For the young king, each day likely began before the heat of the desert became overwhelming. Attendants would help him prepare for the responsibilities ahead. Royal clothing had to be selected, jewelry arranged, ceremonial items prepared. Even the appearance of a pharaoh carried political meaning. The king was not simply a person. He was a symbol. Every public appearance reinforced the image of divine authority. Yet beneath the elaborate clothing stood a teenager, a boy navigating responsibilities far greater than those faced by most people his age. His education had probably begun long before he became king. Royal children were expected to learn many subjects: reading and writing, religious traditions, state ceremonies, diplomacy, military matters, history, the duties of kingship. Tutors likely instructed him in the stories of earlier rulers, the achievements of famous pharaohs. The importance of maintaining ma'at, the sacred balance that kept the universe in harmony. Lessons were not merely academic. They were preparation for leadership. Every piece of knowledge carried practical importance. A future ruler needed to understand how the kingdom functioned. Even if advisors handled many decisions, a pharaoh still had to embody authority. He needed to understand the traditions he represented. Throughout the day, the palace would have been filled with activity. Messengers arrived with reports from distant regions. Officials discussed taxation, construction, and administration. Military leaders provided updates on border security. Priests coordinated religious ceremonies. The machinery of government never truly stopped. Egypt was vast. Its people depended upon stability, and stability required constant effort. Tutankhamun may have attended audiences where officials presented information and sought approval for important matters. These events were carefully staged. The king sat upon a throne. Courtiers approached according to strict protocols. Words were chosen carefully. Respect was mandatory. The setting reminded everyone present of the authority embodied by the crown. Even if experienced advisors influenced many decisions, the king remained the center of the political world. Ceremonies occupied an important part of royal life. Ancient Egyptians believed that pharaohs served as intermediaries between humanity and the gods. Religious rituals reinforced this connection. Offerings were made. Prayers were spoken. Festivals celebrated divine favor. Participation in these ceremonies was one of the king's most sacred responsibilities. To modern eyes, such rituals may appear symbolic. To ancient Egyptians, they were essential. The well-being of the kingdom depended upon maintaining proper relationships with the divine. Every ceremony helped preserve order. Every offering helped sustain harmony. Every ritual strengthened the bond between Egypt and its gods. Yet life at court was not entirely consumed by duty. Evidence suggests that members of the royal family also enjoyed leisure and recreation. Hunting was particularly important among Egyptian royalty. It demonstrated skill, courage, and physical ability. Scenes from royal art often depict kings pursuing birds, wild animals, and game along the Nile. Such activities carried symbolic meaning as well. The successful hunter represented order triumphing over chaos, the ruler proving mastery over the natural world. Tutankhamun himself appears connected to hunting and outdoor pursuits through objects discovered in his tomb: chariots, walking sticks, weapons, equipment associated with movement and activity. These artifacts suggest a young king who participated, at least to some extent, in the recreational traditions of Egyptian royalty. One of the most fascinating aspects of Tutankhamun's life is his relationship with his queen, Ankhesenamun. Ancient art portrays them together in unusually personal scenes. The queen stands beside her husband. They exchange gestures of affection. They appear less distant than many royal couples depicted in earlier Egyptian art. Of course, royal imagery often served political purposes. Artists created idealized visions of kingship. Yet these scenes still offer rare glimpses into the human side of the royal family. They remind us that beneath the crowns and ceremonies lived real people, people who laughed, spoke with one another, shared hopes and fears, faced uncertainty, and experienced loss. Life inside the palace may have seemed luxurious, but it also carried burdens. Privacy was limited. Expectations were enormous. Every action could have political consequences. The young king lived under constant observation. Servants attended him. Officials reported to him. Priests involved him in sacred duties. The demands never truly disappeared. For a child growing into adulthood, such pressures must have been immense. Perhaps the greatest irony of kingship is that the most powerful person in the kingdom is often among the least free. Every movement is planned, every decision scrutinized, every relationship shaped by duty. Tutankhamun's world was filled with privilege, but it was also filled with responsibility. As he grew older, those responsibilities increased. The kingdom expected strength. The court expected leadership. The gods expected devotion. Yet behind the magnificent image presented to the world, there may have been another reality. Evidence discovered thousands of years later suggests that the young king was not physically strong in the way many pharaohs wished to appear. Beneath the golden ceremony was a body that may have struggled with illness and injury. The treasures of his tomb would eventually reveal clues about his health, clues that transformed our understanding of the boy king. Because while ancient artists portrayed an ideal ruler, modern science has uncovered a more fragile and deeply human story. And that story begins with the mysteries hidden within Tutankhamun's own remains. Chapter 6, A Fragile King. For most of history, Tutankhamun's body remained hidden, wrapped in linen, sealed within nested coffins, protected by layers of gold and darkness. For more than 3,000 years, no one knew what secrets his remains might reveal. The treasures of his tomb dazzled the world. The golden mask became an icon. The jewelry, statues, and ceremonial objects captured global attention. Yet some of the most important discoveries were not made among the treasures. They were found within the mummy itself. Modern science has allowed researchers to examine Tutankhamun in ways unimaginable to ancient Egyptians. X-rays, CT scans, genetic studies, advanced imaging technology. Together, these tools have helped historians and scientists piece together a portrait of the young king as a human being rather than a legend. And what they found was surprising. Far from being a powerful warrior in perfect health, Tutankhamun appears to have faced significant physical challenges throughout his life. The image of the ideal pharaoh presented in ancient art does not tell the entire story. Behind the royal symbols stood a young man whose body may have been far more vulnerable than anyone realized. One of the most intriguing discoveries involved his feet. Studies suggest that Tutankhamun may have suffered from conditions that affected his ability to walk comfortably. This finding gained additional significance when archaeologists considered the contents of his tomb. More than 100 walking sticks and staffs were discovered among his possessions. At first glance, such items might seem ceremonial, but the sheer number raised questions. Were these merely symbols of authority? Or did the young king genuinely rely upon them? Many researchers believe at least some of the walking sticks were used in everyday life. If true, they provide a remarkably personal glimpse into his daily struggles. Imagine the contrast. To the public, Tutankhamun was the living embodiment of divine power. Yet in private, he may have depended upon walking aids simply to move comfortably. It is a reminder that ancient rulers, despite their elevated status, remained human. They experienced pain, weakness, limitations, the same physical realities faced by everyone else. Genetic studies have also contributed to our understanding of the boy king. Royal families in ancient Egypt often married within the royal bloodline. These practices were intended to preserve dynastic legitimacy and divine ancestry. However, such marriages could increase the likelihood of inherited health issues. Evidence suggests that Tutankhamun may have experienced some of these consequences. Researchers continue to debate the exact extent of his medical conditions. Science rarely provides simple answers when examining individuals who lived thousands of years ago. New discoveries can alter interpretations. Old theories may be revised. Certainty remains elusive. Yet the overall picture points toward a young ruler who was not physically robust. This reality changes the way we view his life. The traditional image of the Pharaoh often emphasizes strength, victory, perfection. Ancient royal art was designed to project power. Kings appeared athletic and invincible. Enemies were shown defeated. The ruler stood as a symbol of order triumphing over chaos. Tutankhamun likely appeared this way in official imagery as well. But beneath those idealized depictions may have been a teenager facing daily challenges invisible to the public. The contrast makes his story more compelling, not less. History often celebrates extraordinary achievements, conquests, monuments, military triumphs. Yet there is something deeply human about vulnerability, something that allows us to connect across the centuries. The young king becomes easier to understand when we remember that he was not a myth. He was a person living under immense expectations, a person carrying responsibilities while dealing with physical limitations, a person whose life unfolded beneath the constant gaze of a royal court. Another mystery involves injuries discovered on the mummy. For decades, speculation flourished. Some believed Tutankhamun had been murdered. Others imagined palace conspiracies. Stories of assassination captured public imagination. Books and documentaries explored dramatic possibilities. The idea of a murdered boy king seemed irresistible, but science gradually complicated those theories. Some injuries once thought to indicate violence may have occurred after death, damage during mummification, handling by archaeologists, the passage of time itself. Separating ancient trauma from later damage proved difficult. As a result, many of the more sensational murder theories lost support. That does not mean every question has been answered. Far from it. Tutankhamun's health remains one of the most debated subjects in Egyptology. Researchers continue examining evidence. New technologies continue providing fresh insights. The story evolves as knowledge advances. Yet perhaps the most important lesson is not about any single diagnosis. It is about perspective. When we picture Tutankhamun, we often imagine the famous golden mask, the flawless face, the idealized image of eternal youth. But the real young man behind that mask was likely far more complex. He may have experienced discomfort, fatigue, illness, physical challenges hidden beneath royal clothing and ceremonial appearances. And still, he fulfilled his role as king. Still, he participated in ceremonies. Still, he represented stability for a kingdom recovering from upheaval. That reality makes his story more poignant. The treasures of his tomb speak of wealth and power. His remains speak of humanity. Together, they create a fuller picture of the boy king, a ruler both extraordinary and ordinary, a pharaoh whose life contained the same fragility that touches every human life. Perhaps that fragility makes the next chapter all the more tragic, because, despite the resources of a great kingdom, despite the protection of the palace, despite the prayers of priests and the skill of physicians, Tutankhamun would never reach old age. His reign was short, his adulthood barely begun, and somewhere around his 19th year, the life of Egypt's young king came to an abrupt end. The exact reason remains one of history's greatest mysteries, but the consequences would echo across more than 3,000 years, for it was Tutankhamun's death, as much as his life, that transformed him into a legend. Chapter 7. Death Before Adulthood. The life of Tutankhamun ended almost as mysteriously as it began. No ancient historian recorded his final days. No detailed account survives describing the illness, injury, or event that claimed his life. There are no eyewitness reports, no royal diary, no clear explanation carved into stone. Only silence, a silence that has lasted for more than 3,000 years. What historians know with reasonable confidence is that Tutankhamun died very young. Most estimates place his age at around 19 years old. By modern standards, he was barely entering adulthood. Even by the standards of the ancient world, his life was remarkably brief. For a king expected to rule for decades, it was an abrupt ending. The question that has fascinated generations is simple. What happened? How did the boy king die? The answer remains uncertain, and perhaps that uncertainty is part of what makes his story so compelling. In ancient Egypt, death was never viewed as an end. It was a transition, a journey from one existence to another. The deceased entered the realm of the gods, where proper rituals and preparation ensured eternal life. Yet for those left behind, the death of a king created immediate challenges. A pharaoh was more than a ruler. He was the center of political stability, the link between the human world and the divine, the symbol of continuity upon which the kingdom depended. When a king died unexpectedly, uncertainty followed. For Tutankhamun's court, the loss must have been profound. He had no surviving heir to secure the succession. The future suddenly became unclear. Questions emerged. Who would rule next? How would power be transferred? What direction would Egypt take? These concerns likely occupied the minds of officials even as preparations for the king's burial began. But before we explore what happened after his death, we must return to the mystery itself. Over the years, many theories have been proposed. Some suggest illness. Others point to injury. A few imagine darker possibilities. One theory focuses on disease. Ancient Egypt, despite its achievements, could not escape the realities of sickness. Infections could become deadly. Fevers could overwhelm the body. Even minor injuries could lead to serious complications. Medical treatments existed, but their effectiveness was limited compared with modern medicine. A young king suffering from underlying health issues may have been especially vulnerable. Researchers have also found evidence suggesting that malaria may have played a role. If true, the disease could have weakened him significantly. Combined with other health problems, it might have contributed to his death. Yet the evidence remains open to interpretation. Science can reveal clues. It cannot always provide certainty. Another theory involves physical injury. Examinations of the mummy identified a severe fracture in one of Tutankhamun's legs. Some researchers believe the injury occurred shortly before his death. If so, it may have become infected. In an age without antibiotics, even a broken bone could prove fatal. A simple accident might have set off a chain of events leading to tragedy. Imagine a fall from a chariot, a hunting accident, a misstep during travel. Any number of ordinary incidents could become life-threatening in the ancient world. Yet even this explanation remains incomplete. No one knows exactly when the injury occurred. No one knows whether it directly caused his death. The evidence offers possibilities rather than conclusions. And then there are the murder theories. For decades, popular books and documentaries promoted the idea that Tutankhamun had been assassinated. The sudden death of a young king seemed suspicious. Powerful figures surrounded him. Political ambitions existed. Potential successors stood nearby. It was easy to imagine conspiracy. Easy to imagine intrigue unfolding behind palace walls. But as scientific examinations improved, many of these theories lost credibility. Injuries once interpreted as signs of violence were re-examined. Some damage likely occurred after death. Other evidence proved less dramatic than originally believed. While murder cannot be completely ruled out, most historians today view it as less likely than natural causes, illness, or accidental injury. The truth may be frustratingly simple. A young man in poor health encountered a medical crisis his world could not overcome. No conspiracy, no dramatic betrayal, just the harsh realities of life in the ancient world. Yet uncertainty remains, and uncertainty keeps the mystery alive. Perhaps that is why Tutankhamun continues to fascinate us. Human beings are drawn to unanswered questions. We seek explanations. We search for patterns. We want stories to end neatly. But history rarely cooperates. Sometimes the evidence is incomplete. Sometimes the truth disappears with those who lived it. And sometimes a king dies, leaving behind only fragments. What makes Tutankhamun's death particularly tragic is not merely its mystery, it is its timing. He was young, his reign was short, his future remained unwritten. Unlike rulers who left behind decades of accomplishments, Tutankhamun never had the opportunity to fully define himself. We do not know what kind of king he might have become. Would he have ruled wisely for many years? Would he have expanded Egypt's influence? Would he have completed ambitious building projects? Would he have become one of the great names of Egyptian history? Those questions can never be answered. His life ended before those possibilities could unfold. In a strange way, that unfinished story became part of his legacy. The young king remained forever youthful, forever surrounded by potential, forever frozen at the threshold of adulthood. And while his life was cut short, another journey was only beginning. The priests would prepare his body. The rituals of mummification would commence. A tomb would be filled with treasures intended for eternity. The people responsible for his burial could not have known it at the time, but their work would preserve his memory more successfully than any monument ever could. Because the king who died at 19 was about to begin a second life. A life beneath the desert. A life inside a sealed tomb. A life that would remain hidden from the world for more than 3,000 years. Chapter 8. Preparing for Eternity. When Tutankhamun died, grief was only the beginning. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an ending. It was a journey. A passage from the world of the living into the realm of eternity. Everything depended upon proper preparation. Without the correct rituals, the soul might become lost. Without sacred ceremonies, the deceased could struggle to reach the afterlife. Without protection, even a king could face danger beyond death. And so, as the young pharaoh's life came to an end, an enormous effort began. Priests gathered. Officials organized resources. Artisans worked tirelessly. The kingdom prepared to send its king into eternity. For 70 days, according to Egyptian tradition, the process of mummification would transform the body from mortal remains into something capable of surviving forever. The procedure was both practical and spiritual. Specialists carefully preserved the body. Moisture was removed. The remains were treated with natron, a naturally occurring salt that helped prevent decay. Sacred oils and resins were applied. Linen bandages were wrapped around the king layer after layer. Amulets were placed between the wrappings. Each object carried protective meaning. Each prayer served a purpose. Every action followed traditions refined over centuries. To modern observers, mummification can seem unusual, but to the ancient Egyptians, preservation was essential. They believed the soul needed a recognizable body. The physical form served as an anchor for eternal existence. Protecting the body meant protecting the individual. In death, as in life, appearance mattered. The young king would be presented to eternity as a pharaoh. Meanwhile, preparations for his burial advanced rapidly. One mystery surrounding Tutankhamun involves the tomb itself. Compared to those of some earlier pharaohs, his tomb appears relatively modest in size. Many Egyptologists believe his death came unexpectedly. A larger royal tomb may not have been ready. As a result, a smaller tomb, perhaps originally intended for someone else, may have been adapted for the king's burial. If true, it suggests a race against time. Ancient Egyptians placed enormous importance on proper funerary preparation. Delays could not be allowed. The king needed a resting place, and he needed it quickly. Yet although the tomb was smaller than expected, the treasures placed inside were extraordinary. Gold-covered coffins, shrines, furniture, and ceremonial objects. Artists and craftsmen worked with remarkable skill. Every item reflected the resources of a powerful kingdom. Every object served a purpose in the afterlife. Beds, chairs, clothing, weapons, jewelry, food containers, chariots, walking sticks, games, musical instruments. The tomb became a miniature world, a complete royal household prepared for eternity. To the Egyptians, these were not symbols. They were necessities. The afterlife was believed to be a continuation of existence. The king would still need comfort, protection, transportation, entertainment. Everything required for a successful eternal life had to accompany him. One of the most remarkable objects was the series of coffins prepared for his body. Tutankhamun was placed within multiple layers of protection. The innermost coffin was crafted from solid gold. Its surface depicted the king in divine form, arms crossed, sacred regalia in hand, a ruler transformed into an eternal being. Surrounding the coffins stood enormous gilded shrines. Each layer created another barrier between the king and the outside world. By the time the burial was complete, Tutankhamun rested within a complex arrangement of nested structures designed to safeguard him forever. Then there was the mask, the object that would one day become the most famous artifact in Egyptian history. Crafted from gold and precious materials, the funerary mask covered the head and shoulders of the mummy. Its features were calm, timeless, almost serene. The face we recognize today is not necessarily an exact portrait of Tutankhamun. Rather, it represents an idealized king, a pharaoh transformed into an eternal image. For the ancient Egyptians, this transformation was important. Death did not diminish the king. It elevated him. The mortal ruler became divine. The human being became part of the eternal order. As preparations continued, priests performed sacred ceremonies. Among the most important was the opening of the mouth ritual. This ancient ceremony symbolically restored the senses of the deceased. The king would once again be able to see, hear, speak, eat, and breathe in the next world. To modern audiences, such rituals may appear symbolic. To the Egyptians, They were absolutely real. The success of the afterlife depended upon them. Finally, the day of burial arrived. The funeral procession likely moved through the Valley of the Kings beneath the desert sun. Priests chanted prayers. Mourners participated in ceremonies. Officials paid their respects. The young king's body was carried toward its final resting place. One by one, the treasures were arranged within the chambers. The coffins were sealed. The shrines enclosed. Protective spells surrounded the king. The tomb was closed. The entrance hidden. Silence returned. The people who performed these tasks believed they were securing eternity. They believed the king would live forever among the gods. In a sense, they were right, but not in the way they imagined, because something extraordinary happened after the burial. Most royal tombs in Egypt were eventually robbed. Grave thieves searched for gold. Treasures disappeared. Mummies were disturbed. The protection of eternity often failed. Yet somehow, against all odds, Tutankhamun's tomb survived. Not perfectly, not untouched, but largely intact, hidden beneath the sands, forgotten by history, waiting through the rise and fall of empires, waiting through the birth of new religions, waiting through thousands of years of human history. And because it waited, the boy king, who had died at 19, was destined for a second life unlike any pharaoh before him, a second life that would begin with a sealed doorway beneath the desert and a discovery that would astonish the world. For while Tutankhamun's reign was brief, his tomb was about to become immortal. Chapter 9. The Tomb That Escaped Time. For most pharaohs, eternity did not unfold as planned. Ancient Egyptian rulers filled their tombs with gold, jewelry, statues, furniture, and sacred treasures intended to accompany them into the afterlife. They believed powerful spells, hidden chambers, and sealed entrances would protect these riches forever. But history had other ideas. Across the centuries, tomb robbers became one of the greatest threats to royal burials. Gold was simply too tempting. The treasures hidden beneath the desert represented unimaginable wealth. Again and again, thieves broke into tombs. Doors were forced open. Treasures vanished. Mummies were disturbed. Even some of Egypt's greatest rulers could not escape this fate. The Valley of the Kings gradually became a target. Many royal burials that had once glittered with wealth were stripped of their valuables. What remained were empty chambers and scattered fragments. By the time modern archaeologists arrived thousands of years later, countless treasures had already disappeared into history. This makes Tutankhamun's survival all the more remarkable. His tomb should have suffered the same fate. Yet somehow, it escaped almost complete destruction. It is one of the greatest strokes of luck in archaeological history. A chain of accidents and circumstances combined to preserve what should have been lost forever. The story begins with the tomb itself. Unlike the grand burial places of some earlier pharaohs, Tutankhamun's tomb was relatively small. At first glance, this might seem like a disadvantage, a lesser tomb for a lesser-known king, but that modest size may have helped save it. Large monuments attract attention. Gigantic entrances announce their presence. Massive tomb complexes are difficult to hide. Tutankhamun's burial place, however, was more easily concealed by time and nature. After the funeral, workers sealed the entrance. The ceremonies ended. The mourners departed. The desert resumed its quiet work. Year after year, winds carried dust and sand across the valley. Season after season, debris accumulated. Gradually, the entrance became harder to find. Then another piece of fortune appeared. Generations after Tutankhamun's burial, workers constructing nearby royal tombs dumped rubble and stone over parts of the area. The debris further concealed the entrance. Without realizing it, they helped protect the young king. The tomb was effectively buried beneath layers of history. Ironically, what might have seemed like neglect became preservation. There is evidence that ancient robbers did enter the tomb at least once, perhaps twice, shortly after the burial. Some small objects appear to have been taken. Certain seals were broken and later repaired, yet the intrusions were limited, for reasons historians still debate. The thieves never carried away the vast majority of the treasures. Perhaps they were interrupted. Perhaps officials discovered the break-in and resealed the tomb. Perhaps the robbers simply lacked time. Whatever happened, the damage was surprisingly minor compared with the devastation seen elsewhere in the Valley of the Kings. Then came centuries. Then millennia. Empires rose and fell above the hidden chambers. The ancient Egyptian religion disappeared. Greek rulers governed the Nile. Then Romans. Then Arab dynasties. Then Ottoman administrators. Entire civilizations passed across the landscape while the boy king remained undisturbed beneath their feet. The world forgot him. His name faded from memory. Unlike rulers such as Ramesses II, whose monuments continued to dominate the landscape, Tutankhamun left little visible evidence of his existence. Future generations barely knew he had lived. In a strange way, obscurity became his greatest protection. No one searched for him, because no one remembered him. The hidden king slept beneath the valley while history moved on without him. Above ground, nature continued its work. The cliffs endured. The desert winds blew. The stars crossed the night sky exactly as they had during Tutankhamun's lifetime. Seasons became centuries. Centuries became thousands of years. The silence remained unbroken. Inside the tomb, the treasures waited. Golden shrines stood where mourners had placed them. Chariots remained untouched. Jewelry rested in darkness. The king's coffin remained sealed. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. It was as if time itself had paused. Few archaeological discoveries offer such a direct connection to the ancient world. Most sites are fragments, ruins, broken walls, scattered artifacts. Historians often reconstruct the past from incomplete evidence. Tutankhamun's tomb was different. It preserved a moment, a frozen snapshot of royal burial practices from more than 3,000 years ago. The objects remained where ancient hands had left them. The chambers reflected decisions made by priests, craftsmen, and mourners long ago. For archaeologists, such preservation was priceless. The tomb became a time capsule, a direct window into a vanished civilization. And yet, for all its importance, no one knew it was there. The valley had been explored for generations. Numerous tombs had already been discovered. Many experts believed little remained to be found. The age of great discoveries seemed to be ending. Most archaeologists assumed the Valley of the Kings had surrendered its secrets, but one man refused to give up. A determined archaeologist named Howard Carter remained convinced that a missing royal tomb still waited somewhere beneath the desert. Year after year, he searched. Season after season, he dug through rubble and sand. Many considered the effort hopeless. Money was running out. Patience was running thin. Failure seemed inevitable. Yet Carter persisted, and in November of 1922, a workman's accidental discovery revealed the first step leading downward into the earth. A hidden staircase. A sealed doorway. A forgotten king. The silence of 3,000 years was about to end. The world had no idea that one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history was waiting just beyond a sealed door in the darkness. And when that door finally opened, Tutankhamun's second life would begin. Chapter 10, Carter's Discovery. For years, Howard Carter refused to quit. The Valley of the Kings had already yielded many of its secrets. Tomb after tomb had been discovered. Archaeologists mapped burial chambers, cataloged artifacts, and studied the remains of long-dead rulers. Most experts believed the valley had little left to offer. If any royal tombs remained hidden, they were probably destroyed, robbed, or impossible to find. But Carter disagreed. He believed one important tomb was still missing. The tomb of a little-known king named Tutankhamun. Fragments discovered throughout the valley suggested the young pharaoh had once been buried there. Objects bearing his name had appeared in unexpected places. Small clues pointed toward a royal burial that had never been located. To Carter, the evidence was impossible to ignore. Somewhere beneath the desert, he believed, Tutankhamun was still waiting. His search was supported by a wealthy British aristocrat, Lord Carnarvon. Together, they spent years excavating the valley. Workers removed enormous amounts of rubble. Season after season passed. Results remained disappointing. Money disappeared. Hope faded. Many people doubted the search would ever succeed. Even Lord Carnarvon began losing patience. After years of effort, little remained to justify the expense. The valley seemed exhausted. The dream appeared to be slipping away. Then came one final chance. Carter convinced Carnarvon to fund a last excavation season. One more attempt. One more opportunity before the project ended forever. Neither man could have imagined how close they were to changing history. On the morning of the 4th of November 1922, workers began clearing an area near the tomb of Ramesses VI. It was not the most promising location. The ground had been covered by debris left behind by ancient workers centuries earlier. Many archaeologists assumed nothing important remained beneath it. Then something unusual appeared, a cut step carved into the bedrock. At first it seemed insignificant, but as more debris was removed, additional steps emerged, one after another, a staircase descending into the earth. Excitement grew. The workers continued carefully. The steps led downward toward a sealed doorway. On the plaster covering the entrance were impressions of ancient seals, royal seals, the kind that suggested an untouched burial. Carter immediately recognized the importance of the discovery. He halted further work and sent a telegram to Lord Carnarvon in England. The message was brief but extraordinary. At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact. Await your arrival. For several agonizing weeks, Carter waited. The staircase remained protected. The doorway remained sealed. The secret remained hidden. Finally, Carnarvon arrived in Egypt, accompanied by his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert. The moment of truth had come. The group carefully examined the doorway. The seals appeared ancient. The entrance had been closed for thousands of years. What lay beyond? No one knew. Workers began opening the doorway. Behind it they found a corridor filled with stone chips and debris. This was encouraging. The passage appeared untouched. At the end of the corridor stood another sealed door. Again, ancient seals were visible. Again, excitement mounted. On the 26th of November, 1922, Carter prepared to make a small opening in the upper corner of the doorway. The atmosphere must have been electric. Years of searching, years of doubt, years of persistence, all leading to this single moment. Carter carefully removed a small section of plaster. Warm air escaped from the darkness beyond. He inserted a candle through the opening. For a moment he could see nothing. Then his eyes adjusted. Shapes emerged from the shadows. Strange animals, golden furniture, statues, treasures piled everywhere. The chamber glittered in the candlelight. Behind him, Carnarvon waited impatiently. Unable to contain himself, he asked the famous question, "Can you see anything?" Carter's reply would become one of the most celebrated lines in archaeological history. Yes, wonderful things. The words perfectly captured the moment. Not because they were dramatic, But because they were true, the room beyond exceeded anything archaeologists had ever encountered. Objects lay crowded together in astonishing numbers. Golden couches, shaped like sacred creatures, decorated chests, weapons, ceremonial items, chariots dismantled and carefully stored. Treasures filled nearly every available space, and this was only the first chamber. The discovery quickly became clear. This was not merely another tomb. It was something extraordinary. Unlike most royal burials in Egypt, this one had survived largely intact. The treasures remained where ancient mourners had placed them. The story of a pharaoh's burial had been preserved in astonishing detail. Yet the greatest discovery still waited deeper within. Beyond the outer chambers stood additional sealed doorways, additional rooms, additional mysteries. Months of careful work followed. Every object had to be documented, photographed, catalogued, preserved. Nothing could be rushed. The world watched with growing fascination as reports emerged from Egypt. Newspapers carried updates across continents. Readers followed each development eagerly. The hidden king was becoming famous. Eventually, Carter's team reached the burial chamber itself. There they found enormous gilded shrines nested one inside another. Layer upon layer of protection surrounded the king. The process of opening them took months. Each barrier revealed another. Each discovery deepened the mystery. Finally, the coffins themselves appeared. Inside rested the mummy of Tutankhamun, still wrapped, still protected, still surrounded by treasures intended for eternity. And there, covering the face of the young king, was an object that would become one of the most recognizable artifacts in human history: the golden funerary mask. Its calm expression seemed untouched by time. The face of a ruler, dead for more than 3,000 years, gazed once again upon the world. The irony was extraordinary. During his lifetime, Tutankhamun had been a relatively minor king. His reign was short, his accomplishments modest compared to many famous pharaohs. Yet because his tomb survived, he now achieved something none of them could have imagined: global fame. Within a few years, millions of people knew his name. The forgotten boy king had become an international sensation, but the discovery was only the beginning. The treasures of the tomb would ignite a worldwide fascination with ancient Egypt unlike anything seen before. Museums, newspapers, films, books, exhibitions. The entire world became captivated by the young pharaoh. And as his fame spread, so did something else. A darker story, a mysterious legend that would transform the archaeological discovery into one of history's greatest supernatural tales. The legend of the Pharaoh's curse. Why the boy king became legendary. The story of Tutankhamun is one of history's greatest ironies. Many pharaohs ruled longer. Many commanded larger armies. Many built monuments that reshaped the landscape of Egypt. Some conquered distant lands. Others governed for decades, leaving behind achievements that changed the course of history. Tutankhamun did none of these things. His reign was short. His accomplishments, while important, were modest compared to Egypt's greatest rulers. He inherited a kingdom recovering from religious upheaval. He helped symbolize a return to stability. Then, before reaching adulthood, he died. By every conventional measure, he should have become a footnote in history, a minor king remembered only by specialists, a name buried within ancient records, a ruler overshadowed by greater pharaohs. Instead, he became the most famous pharaoh the world has ever known, not because of what he achieved in life, but because of what happened after his death. His tomb survived. That simple fact changed everything. While the treasures of countless rulers were stolen, scattered, or destroyed, Tutankhamun's burial remained hidden beneath the sands of the Valley of the Kings. For more than 3,000 years, it waited. Empires rose and fell above it. Languages changed. Religions spread. Entire civilizations appeared and disappeared. Still, the boy king slept undisturbed in the darkness. Then, in 1922, the modern world found him. And suddenly, the forgotten king became immortal. The discovery offered something humanity rarely receives: a direct connection to the ancient past. Not fragments, not ruins, not scattered relics, but an almost complete royal burial, preserved across millennia. The treasures revealed how ancient Egyptians lived, how they worshipped, how they prepared for death, how they imagined eternity. Through Tutankhamun, an entire civilization seemed to speak again. Yet perhaps the most fascinating part of his story is not the gold, not the mask, not the treasure-filled chambers. It is the mystery, the unanswered questions, the uncertainties that continued to surround his life. Who exactly was he? What was he truly like as a person? How much power did he possess? What happened during his final days? What future might he have built had he lived longer? History does not provide complete answers, and perhaps it never will. But mystery has its own power. It invites imagination. It keeps stories alive. It allows each generation to ask the same questions anew. The young king remains forever suspended between fact and legend, a real person whose life became larger than history itself. Today, millions recognize the golden face of Tutankhamun. Few remember the names of many rulers who achieved far more during their lifetimes. That is one of history's strangest lessons. Fame is not always earned through greatness. Sometimes it is earned through survival, through preservation, through chance, through being discovered at exactly the right moment. In the end, Tutankhamun's greatest achievement was something he never planned. He became a bridge between worlds, between ancient Egypt and the modern age, between archaeology and imagination, between history and legend. The boy king ruled for only a few years, but his story has endured for more than 3,000. And as long as people remain fascinated by the mysteries of the past, the young pharaoh who slept beneath the desert sands will never truly be forgotten. For while kings dream of immortality, Tutankhamun found it. Not through conquest, not through monuments, not through power, but through a sealed tomb, a hidden treasure, and a discovery that allowed the world to meet him again. The boy king died at 19, yet somehow he became eternal.